Well, Shabbat Shalom again, everybody. I want to talk with you today about heroes. And we need them. I was very saddened when I learned over the past couple of years that both in Europe and the United States, mobs had come and torn down statues, even of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, and these are people who want to destroy the memory of our past. They have various political and other motivations. But it's a very sad thing because we need heroes. We need people who rise above to inspire us to be the best people we can be. And per Dave's comments during the Torah service, the biblical picture is not that heroes are perfect, but they're still worthy of honor and respect, and we still need them. And so it's really quite an important subject. We need our heroes. So this week we think about Joseph as a hero, but we're not going to talk about him too much because in a couple of weeks we're going to emphasize things that he did that were so truly heroic and had such implications for the future of the Jewish people to this day that we'll save that. But I do want to talk with you about Judah Maccabee. I want to talk with you about Chanukah. Chanukah begins Sunday night, and you'll hear from Rabbi Nathan in a little while how we're going to be lighting candles together, though over Zoom. But I want to tell you about what happened in the days of Judah Maccabee and give you some kind of context, some way to understand so it's not a larger-than-life holiday but without any kind of reality from everyday life and from the machinations of kingdoms and people and with all that comes with that. So in the middle of the 4th century before Yeshua, around the 330s and that general time frame, I'm not going to give you a lot of dates, there was a leader who you've heard of, and his name was Alexander the Great. You've heard of him, right? Alexander the Great. And he was an amazing guy. Before he was 30 years old, he and Greece had conquered everywhere from Greece all the way to northern India. I mean, that's amazing, just absolutely astounding. And he really was just an amazing leader, one of the most successful military people of history. Well, anyhow, he died prematurely, and his kingdom was broken up between or among 4 generals. And 2 of them become important to the people of Israel. You had the Ptolemies. Ptolemy was the general, and his lineage and his kingdom was in Egypt. Okay, so that was to the south. Call it to the south and slightly to the west. And then you had the Seleucids, and they were to the north and a little bit to the east, and that is where Syria is. So the Seleucids reigned in Syria. Now the Seleucids, generally following the Greek ways, generally when they conquered a country, they would let the people have their own gods and their own religion. They wouldn't hassle them too much. But a guy rose up, the son of the most famous of the Seleucid emperors up at that time, Antiochus III. Well, this is Antiochus IV. And Antiochus IV reversed the policy of being kind and somewhat open and allowing people to be who they were. And he, for various reasons, was extremely angry. And, I can tell you one story. He wanted to attack Ptolemy. So he sends his army south to attack, but he encounters the new kids on the block with a lot of power, and that's the Romans. And they encounter him, and they make him an offer you can't refuse. And they said, the Roman officer drew in the sand a circle around Antiochus IV and said, you're going to go back home, and you're going to commit yourself to going back home and not fighting the Seleucids, and you're not going to leave that circle until you tell me you're heading home. Well, the Romans were becoming a powerful kingdom themselves and allied with the Ptolemies. He knew he didn't stand a chance, so he agreed. He was publicly humiliated and went back through Israel, and the conjecture is, the thought is that part of the reason he was so hostile was because of that incident, that shaming incident where his power was just nullified in the public perception, and that could have fueled his attitude as be a tough guy thing, toward Israel. He also was, as were all the Greeks, purveyors of Greek civilization. And they thought, they wore buttons that said, Greek is great. That's what they did. You know, buttons. No, I don't know about the buttons. No archaeological, but buttons. The Greek is great. They love Greek culture, and they viewed Greek culture as superior to all the other cultures. And so there was an inherent problem because Greek culture theoretically accepted all these other religions and all that, but kind of looked down at them. You know, really smart Greeks were into philosophy and science, and they had no room for these gods, and especially the God of Israel, because he was presented as the only God. And if you're going to worship God, you're going to have to worship this one God who made heaven and earth. And you can see there was a clash. They didn't like that. Okay, so let me speed up here a little bit. So Antiochus went into Israel and sacrificed a big swine on the altar of the temple, and took the blood of the swine and sprinkled it on people and on the holy books, right? And he then made the Kohanim, the priests, drink a broth of the swine blood. Can you imagine this? I mean, really, this is tough stuff. And he did something really terrible. He, among these other terrible things, he extinguished the Ner Tamid. What is the Ner Tamid? Do you know what that is offhand? Oh, I have to stay in my right place here. Ner Tamid. What's a Ner Tamid? Eternal life, right? And in the synagogue, we have a Ner Tamid. Right now it's in the ark. But you know we're having a new ark built, and it's going to be gorgeous. It's going to be gorgeous. And we're going to have a Ner Tamid, and we're working with how to navigate that, where to place it and the style and all that. But synagogues have Ner Tamids because it's the eternal light demonstrating God's being eternal and his eternal covenant with Israel. Do you get that right, everybody? We're good with that? Okay. So he extinguished it. And so what happened is there was a man, had several sons. His name was Mattathias. And he lived in a little town called Modin. And I've been to Modin. Maybe we'll go to Modin when we go back to Israel in a year or so. And so situation was there was the Greeks showed up, the soldiers. They got all the people in the town square and said, hear ye, you will all pour out a libation to the Greek gods on the ground. And a Jew came forward and did it, and Mattathias was so angry he killed him. And that kicked off the revolt of the Maccabees against the Syrians. Now the Maccabees weren't a huge group, and the Syrians were reported to have armies at varying times of their kingdom between 70 and 200,000 soldiers. So the Maccabees didn't look like they could win very easily. But I want to talk about Judah. Now, we don't know a lot about his personal life, and that has to do with the way history was written. See, back nowadays, when we write, and when you read books about Hamilton or whatever book you're reading, the author's very interested in what his married life was like. Was he nice to his wife? How did people feel about him? Was he a melancholic guy like Lincoln, or was he a happy-go-lucky guy? And all these internal psychological observations are really important in our age, ever since the 19th century, really. And they're real important. But back then, history writing wasn't concerned with what your married life was like so much. I mean, it may mention, as in the case of Herod the Great, he killed Marianne, his wife. Okay, that's a big thing. But how they got along and what they talked about and what his humor was like and all that was just not the way history was written back in those days. So we don't know too much. So we have to use a little bit of what I like to call sanctified imagination. And we're going to imagine that this army that he had of freedom fighters, call them, or these Jews who were concerned that Antiochus wanted to wipe out Judaism, that if they didn't do something, it was all over. And they were right, and we'll talk about that. But I imagine that a number of the battles because you got to figure war is dirty and messy, and you win some and you lose some. I imagine Judah as having tremendous internal conflicts. First of all, he had to kill fellow Jews, or so we thought, because they were assimilated and playing with the Syrians. And that had to be tough. And then he saw his own men killed, and he was fighting a huge battle-hardened army. And I'm sure he felt a little bit like, if you're familiar at all with Henry V, the Shakespearean play, and there's this famous soliloquy, this famous scene where Henry V is agonizing over what's going to be happening the next day. He has to fight this battle, and he hates being king. He envies being a peasant. At least you don't have all this responsibility. And I imagine that it was somewhat like that for Judah. But whatever we may speculate about that, the big point is that he goes into Jerusalem and manages to kick out the Syrians and rededicate the temple, and then we have the story of Hanukkah, which we'll be hearing more about on the following days. But here's the thing I want you to remember and why he's such a hero. This is what you got to hold on to. If the Maccabees had lost, that they were imperfect people, and their kingdom, called the Hasmoneans, was filled with all kinds of challenges, per David's point a little earlier today. But had they not won, and had the equivalent of our secular culture won, had the Syrians won, it's amazing how quickly societies can change. I want to suggest to you that during that roughly 150-year period from the time of the Maccabees to Yeshua, there would have been no prophecies anyone would know about for him to fulfill. In other words, coming into Israel, we can speculate it would have been a spiritual vacuum, that no one would have had any kind of concept how to interpret him. And yet the Maccabees won, and as a result, a respect for the scripture and all the other developing elements of Jewish life were maintained. And that's why when Yeshua came into the world, there were prophecies that can be written about in which he filled full or fulfilled. And so it's really a big deal. So we need our changes. I mean, I look at our society and how things have changed over the past 20 years in America. That was 150. You can imagine what kind of things would have occurred. All right, he was a great hero. And I mention all these things so that when you enter into Hanukkah, isn't a kind of pro forma, casual thing. When you light those candles, you just think about Judah Maccabee and think about what he did and what his followers did. Rescued us all. There'd be no us. There'd be no us. Humanly speaking, of course, God would have worked out another way, I'm sure. Okay, now I want to talk to you about a great heroine in Israel. Because this season, although we don't have a liturgy for Christmas, and it's not really, for all kinds of cultural and other reasons, it's not something that we elevate in of itself. Actually, we're working toward a way of acknowledging the birth, one of the great miracles of Jewish history, and events of Jewish history, the incarnation of the Messiah. We're working on ways to bring that into Jewish space, and we're very grateful for Rabbi Nathan, who has developed a way of celebrating the birth of the Messiah within the framework of a Seder, with elements of the Seder, not the Passover Seder, a different Seder. There are multiple Seders in Judaism, and he'll tell us more about how that'll be celebrated real soon. So, but we want to acknowledge the heroes of the times, and so we want to acknowledge Miriam. Now, what we're going to be having in just a moment, and I'm going to ask her to come up and take her place right at the reading table, Michelle Zazula is going to be reading for us a short segment from Sholem Ash's book, Mary. How many of you have read the book? I know some of you. Okay, we have a few people who have. Sholem Ash, late 19th century Yiddish writer, up there with Sholem Aleichem, Fiddler on the Roof, right? And Peretz and other great writers. But he got himself in trouble. And you know why? He got himself in trouble because he wrote books exalting people in the Besorah, in the New Testament. He wrote Paul, he wrote the Nazarene about Yeshua, he wrote Mary, And in the Jewish community, they were wondering, you're writing a lot about this stuff. Well, he did, because I wonder if the guy was at some level a believer in Yeshua. You don't write that many books about it without him making a real impression on you. I think he was a follower of Yeshua at some level. Okay, so anyhow, he wrote this book, Mary. And I want to tell you what's happening, and Michelle, if you would take your place, and I want to tell you what's happening as she reads to us. What's happening is Miriam had encountered the angel, Gabriel. And he had told her that she was going to bear the Mashiach. And from that point, she began to withdraw a little bit from among her friends, and there was a certain something about her which just seemed different. And in our section, we encounter her at the water well where the daughters of Israel would go and draw water, and how she was treated. And the idea is to present a very reasonable picture of what it was like for her as she became increasingly marginalized because people just didn't understand what had occurred, and it hadn't become clear. It was going to get even worse when it became clear she was pregnant. But at this point, she had aroused the jealousy and hostility of the women. So if you would please read the passage for us, Michelle.
Okay. And once the daughters of the town heard Miriam's spirit at first hand. Miriam had continued to draw water each morning at the communal well behind the town. Hannah let her go, much against her inclination, only because it was so natural a thing to have one's daughter go to the town well that no other course seemed conceivable. Now the town well was the women's forum, the hub from which all news, gossip, and scandal radiated. Here in the early mornings and amid much whispering and husky cachinnation, the girls and women exchanged confidences and told one another the events of the previous day and what was lately being said of this man or that woman. Needless to say, Miriam's conduct had become a rich source of gossip for the chattering women, and each morning, Miriam's neighbors would come running up breathlessly to tell their cronies in a panting voice what the girl had lately been heard singing from her mother's rooftop, that she, of all daughters in Jewry, had been elected to bring hope to Israel. On one of these mornings, as Miriam approached with her pitcher mounted on her head, she noticed the women and girls standing in a cluster by the well, whispering together. Their eyes, without exception, were fixed on herself, so that the subject of their conversation could not well be doubted. As Miriam reached the mouth of the well, the women backed away to give her room, though her turn was not yet. But no sooner had she filled her pitcher and had turned, ready to go home, than she found herself surrounded on all sides by women who would block her path. One of them, with a face swarthied by the sun and a brassy ringlet dangling from her nose, they called her Avihu, of the evil tongue, strutted before Miriam with her arms akimbo, saying, "So you're the one that's been picked to bring hope to the Jews and become Israel's mother? Doesn't she look like a matriarch now?" taunted another, "just like Rachel and Leah?" "I have been chosen to be the handmaid of the Lord," said Miriam, as if the questions had been posed in good faith. "How do you know," they asked again, If you have not been with a man, how do you know these things will come your way? Perhaps the Lord will lock your womb with 7 bolts. Who knows? Pilfered fruit, they say, tastes sweetest, threw in old Tamar, a grass widow of long standing, and she let out a whistling chuckle from her ruined mouth that looked like a broken-in window. Miriam glanced about her. The women stood their ground in a closed circle, their faces dark with hate and malice. The girl felt a chill of fear upon her spine, and letting go of her pitcher, sank to her knees and raised her folded hands. She said nothing, but her lips trembled, and the hectic rose so quickly to her face that the women backed away and almost fell over each other. From a distance, they continued to stare at the kneeling girl and held their breath, listening to a soliloquy which fell from Miriam's lips like the chant of a psalm that one has learned by rote. Mighty acts has the Lord shown unto me. As an eagle did he come into my chamber, and as a raven did he lift me up upon his wings to carry me into the clouds. Not among the cedars of Lebanon, nor among the mountains of Judah did he build his nest, but planted it among the tender reeds of Galilee. And in my father's humbled house he chose the lowliest of his handmaids to bear within her womb the hope of Israel. From her loins shall issue succor and salvation, which shall know no bounds, nor cease until the end of time, to fill the earth and the vault of heaven. Did you hear that? Do you hear what she said? Cried one of the women in a shrill, hysterical voice. She said herself she was pregnant with the hope of Israel? And the women turned and rushed wildly home to spread the fearsome tidings in the town. A virgin has conceived in Israel.
Thank you so much, Michelle. You get the picture. It's tough being a hero. But she was one of the great heroes of Israel. Or I like the feminine heroine. I like using both. Now, interestingly enough, her heroism is memorialized in the Bible in the book of Revelation. Let me just share this with you as we get close to the end here. Miriam's heroism is celebrated in Revelation chapter 12 when there is a cosmic image of her fused with the end times destiny of Israel. It's really an amazing passage. And here is how God responds to her acts of incredible heroism as a woman living in a little town of Israel who bears the Mashiach. And a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs and in the agony of giving birth. And she gave birth to a male child, one who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was caught up to God and to his throne, and the woman fled into the wilderness, where a place was prepared by God, in which she is to be nourished for 1,260 days. So we won't get into the details here, but you see how the image of Miriam is fused with that of all of Israel, because she is a truly great heroine. Okay, now here's what I really want you to take away from all this. There's a sense in which all of us, in little ways and perhaps sometimes big ways, are called to be heroes. All of us. Every one of us in our unique circumstances. I mean, Yeshua said it. I'll read it to you. It's from the Sermon on the Mount that we read earlier in English. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. We have heroes among us at Ruach Israel. I tell you, think of the Halzels and the Laskos. And here you have two sets of moms and dads with sons who are very needy. And to me, these folks are heroes. Now, if you asked them or said to them, you're a hero, they would deny it. Because that's the thing about being a real hero. It's an utterly unself-conscious thing. You're not trying to be something. You're just stepping up to the plate and doing what's necessary because you know that it's up to you to do it, and you've got to do it. That's the essence of it. But it is amazingly unself-conscious. So I close with this. How do you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and me, how do we grow should God call us? And he does in little ways all the time, but in even big ways. How do we grow into the role so that we can be heroes to the people that care about us and who observe our lives? That's the question. And I just want to give you just a couple of tips. Number one, I want to encourage you all to know what you stand for and why. Know what you stand for and why. The unexamined life is not the life worth living, the philosopher said. And we understand that to know who you are and to know who God is and to know what it is that you believe about the essence of things is absolutely the foundational quality of the hero. Whether it's Yehuda Maccabee, whether it's Miriam, whether it's you. Know who you are and what you really stand for. Number two, live. It's going to sound like a catchphrase, but it's really very deep. Live to love, sometimes with tough love. Live to love. In other words, the motivation that causes people to rise up and do amazing things, the highest motivations come not from self-aggrandizement or making a lot of money or whatever, but comes from love. Love for God, love for people. So know who you are and what your basic beliefs, your convictions are, and let them be clear in your mind. Live to love, and frankly, leave the rest to God. Real heroes, again, rise up unself-consciously. They just meet the need when it arises. And I love the quote of one who was going to become a hero, I believe, in our world, and that's John F. Kennedy Jr., when he said this. He said, "I'd rather be a good man than a great man." Love it. That's being a hero, or a potential hero in his case. So, enjoy Hanukkah. Remember the birth of Yeshua, and act like a hero as life demands it. Shabbat shalom, everyone.